Hello, well in my previous video about Star Trek Adventures I was talking about the books, but as you can see I'm going to be talking to you about the Quickstart guide, which you can download for free from the manufacturer's website or from your favourite PDF delivery system. Now it's about 27 pages and I think it's actually a better way of teaching the game. As you can see, it's advertising some of the products including the limited edition Borg cube. And the key bit about it is it gives you a nice little simple conversion chart, just like the main rules, but it then does a really good job of actually showing you the actual stats, etc. So for example, your attributes are control, daring, fitness, insight, presence and reason, and as you can see, control is a character's self-discipline, daring is your bravery, fitness is your physical strength, insight's your understanding, presence is like the force of personality, command, etc. and reason is your kind of intelligence. The disciplines are command, so directing a crew, con, piloting a starship, security, ability to defend yourself, engineering, mechanical, technical problems, science, knowledge, understanding, medicine, healing, treating illnesses. It also tells you about what a focus is. Now a focus is a sort of discipline attachment that you can use for a mechanical advantage in tests. So when you roll your d20, if you roll under your discipline and you have an equivalent focus, then it gives you a bonus success effectively. Now when you do a task, you basically combine, as it says here, an attribute with a discipline, roll your d20s and try and roll under the combination of attribute and discipline, and if you've got the focus, obviously you're trying to roll under your discipline for that bonus success. Now the Game Master will set a difficulty to the tasks, so as you can see it's from 0 to 5. That's how many successes you need to pass that particular test. So it talks about that here and various bits and pieces. A natural 1 gives you 2 successes, but of course the key bit is to at least pass the difficulty number. Now if you roll excessive successes, so let's say you need to get 3 successes and you roll 4, that would generate something called momentum, which is talked about on page 11 in the Quickstart rules, and then you get told how you did. A little example here. Now there are traits which are these bits that you get from, for example, your race. So like a trill will have the trait of being a trill and probably symbiont, and you can use those traits to generate what's known as an advantage or a complication. So if the trait's irrelevant, it doesn't do anything. If it's a beneficial trait, then you can perform a task that you normally couldn't, or you reduce the difficulty by 1, i.e. giving you an advantage. If it's detrimental, then you get a disadvantage and the difficulty is increased by 1. And you might find it's so detrimental that you're not even allowed to attempt the task. So it's a sort of a role-playing mechanic with a slight mechanical advantage. So task difficulties talks about there. And then how do you improve your odds? Well, this is where you can get someone to help you. So you can get someone to do a test, which if they succeed gives you a success for your attempt. You can spend momentum to get extra dice, and it costs you 1 momentum for 1 dice, 2 momentum for the second dice, so for a total of 3, and 3 momentum for your third dice for a total of 6. And if you don't have any momentum, you can actually generate what's known as threat, which is effectively momentum for a game master. If you've got determination, then you can spend that, and if you do that you get an extra d20, but it automatically gives you a success of 1. Which is 2 successes, so a very powerful feature. In addition, some talents will grant you bonus d20s, or by spending momentum give you various effects. It depends on the particular talent that you've got. You might have to roll an opposed roll, so it talks a bit about momentum here and threat. Also talks a little bit about determination and then some examples of how that works. And when you're spending determination, you've got perfect opportunity, moment of inspiration, surge of activity, and make it so. So perfect opportunity is that D20 with a result of 1. Moment of inspiration allows you to re-roll all the dice in your dice pool, which could be pretty impressive. Surge of activity, you can do an extra task. Normally you can only do 1 task a turn, so that's can be pretty cool. And make it so allows you to create an advantage in a particularly tricky scene, so maybe giving you a chance to actually do something. Threat, as I say, is the equivalent for the Game Master, and it's got a load of things here, so momentum, complications, threatening circumstances, etc. And now typically where a player would have to spend momentum, a GM would have to spend threat. Now when a GM spends threat, it's just discarded. You don't give a player momentum, although you could potentially, I suppose, as a GM, generate threat for yourself by giving an advantage to a player. So it's like you're going to get this short-term advantage, but in the long run it's going to come back to bite you. So that's something you can actually agree. With conflict then, as you can see, the game divides things up into rounds and turns, and it can cause a little bit of confusion here when you're talking about stuff, but what's interesting is it has a little bit of complexity here. So you've got a range of reach, so melee, close range, medium range, long range, and extreme range, and then you've got various actions you can do. Now you can do your first action for free, but you have to buy subsequent actions. So actions are aiming, grabbing a weapon, picking up a weapon, dropping prone on the floor, interacting with things, moving, but if you're moving, you're going to have trouble if you're in melee range of someone, so you might not be able to move away, preparing yourself, and standing up if you're prone. And then you can also do a task, so assist, attack, create an advantage, direct, guard, pass, ready, recover, sprint, first aid, other tasks. First aid is pretty important. If you actually take lethal damage and end up getting an injury, then you actually can die in combat. So first aid's very useful to stabilise you so you don't die. You can also use, I think, momentum and determination to kind of get around that as well. So it talks about what you do. So you pick a weapon, pick a target, whether it's lethal or non-lethal. If it's lethal, then you have to spend effectively a threat point by giving it to the GM. If you're the GM and you're trying to do lethal attacks on players, then you have to spend threat. So that there is that sort of balancing mechanic there. So depending on the sort of attack you've got, this is where your attribute and discipline comes into play. So daring and security is how you attack someone in melee, and basically control and security is what you use for ranged attacks, and the standard difficulty is 1, but it can be modified as it talks about here, including for range, etc. When you've actually hit someone, you roll this little symbol, which is the challenge die, those special little d6s I've been talking about, and then they roll their resistance die to try and avoid that damage. Any damage that goes over resistance gets applied to your stress, and then there's a couple of rules for that. So if you suffer 5 damage in 1 hit, you get an injury. If your damage takes you down to 0 stress, you suffer an injury. If you're already at 0 stress and you take any damage of any sort, you suffer an injury, and that can be really bad for you. So you could actually get 2 injuries, which would not be good. That incapacitates you, takes you out of the fight, and as I say, if it's lethal damage, you will basically die at the end of combat. So not the end of the turn, but the end of the combat. So there's plenty of time in theory for you to be rescued. There's momentum spends you can do, it gives you all sorts of stuff. Various weapons have effects, so for example area, here's a table by the way for the various momentum spends. Knockdown, that's quite a useful one. You can knock someone over and they have to spend threat or momentum to basically avoid being knocked over. There's other things like, for example, where's it gone? Cumbersome here. This weapon cannot be used unless you do the prepare action. So if you've got a cumbersome weapon, you have to use your prepare action to then do an attack. So that ties you up in that round, so you can't move, you can't do other stuff. So nice little tweaks like that, which give a little bit of meat to what is a fairly simple system. Unfortunately, it gives a little bit of meat to a fairly simple system, and that's where the game is a little bit hard to describe to people and play, and could bog down if you're not careful. But I think, keeping in mind the Star Trek spirit, you can play fairly fast and loose with the rules, and then just for a really important fight allow it to bog down a bit by bringing in all these special rules, etc. But that's something for you and your players to decide. We've then got an away mission here, which I'm not going to go into, but it's basically an actual adventure. So if we actually look at the entire document, what's this? Page 19 is where the rules end, and if we go back, was it about page 6? Yeah, so basically the core rules are less than 15 pages, so that great big 300-page book I was showing you in my previous video has got a lot of fluff, a lot of extra stuff, a lot more detail. Obviously there's no character generation in the Quickstart rules, you actually use pre-generated characters, so let's quickly jump down to them. So here you go, let's make this fit on the page. Here you go. So we've got a medical officer here who's a Vulcan, so they've got the trait of Vulcan, and they have the values of seeking life, precision, diligence, hesitation, the needs of the many. So these are values that a GM and a player can tap into for role-playing reasons, and also possibly to, as I say, generate a mechanical advantage in the game. So maybe you say, well, my hesitation is as bad as inaction. I'm going to use that to give me an advantage. And the GM goes, yeah, that's a good idea. And then, maybe half an hour later, they go, hesitation's as bad as inaction. I'm going to use that to give you a disadvantage because you're not actually following your value. So you're going to be disadvantaged here. Their attributes, as I mentioned, can range from, well, as a player character, 7 to 12, because all your attributes start with a value of 7 in character generation, and your disciplines range from 1 to 5, and again, as a starting player, they're automatically all at 1. Focuses then, which link into discipline, so emergency medicine. So for example, if someone's doing a medicine check, they could use the emergency medicine to say, okay, if I roll under 5 on my medicine check, I get a double success due to my emergency medicine focus. And there's a couple of other options there which you can read yourself. You've then got talents. Now talents are a little bit tricky, and this is where, as I say, the game does have a problem. You've got values, you've got focuses, you've got talents, you've got momentum, and it takes a fairly simple rule and starts making it a bit more complex, but it also makes it a really rich game system. So let's have a look at just one of them. Let's start with first response. So the first response talent says, when attempting the first aid task during a combat encounter, you gain a bonus d20. So you're going to be rolling 3 d20 straight away. And you may always succeed at a cost, with each complication adding +1 to the difficulty of healing the injury subsequently. So basically, you can succeed by making it more complicated to heal. So you might stabilize the person, but their injury is going to be harder to deal with later. So it's a kind of fix them from dying now, but no, you're going to have problems later. So that's quite interesting. Now they've got a determination of 1. The maximum determination you can have is 3. They've got a stress of, what is that, 10? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 by the looks of it. So they can take 11 damage before being taken out. But obviously remember, if they take 5 in one blow, that will take them out as well. So basically 3 good hits and they could be down. They have 0 resistance, they've got absolutely no armour at all, so they don't really want to get hit. And when they come to attack in, they've got an unarmed strike and a phaser type 1. Now the unarmed strike is a melee attack, it rolls 4 combat dice. Doesn't look like they've got a note here of combat bonus, which I believe would be 3 for this person, so I'm not sure if they've built the combat bonus in. I'd have to check the main rule book, but that they could get a bonus 3 dice potentially on an attack. If they hit you with a special effect roll, which if I remember correctly is a 5 and 6 on a normal d6, they will also get the benefit of a knockdown, so they hit you for 1 damage and also knock you down. It's a one-handed weapon and it's non-lethal, so an unarmed strike will never kill someone, but you could knock them unconscious. Now I believe there is a momentum spend you can do to say this non-lethal attack is actually going to be lethal, but I'd have to again double check the rule book for that. Phasers, obviously they are potentially lethal. 5 damage dice, one-handed weapon, and you can charge it up to do things like area effect, penetrating blast, stuff like that. And standard equipment, comm badge, tricorder, medkit. So this is the sort of character that you will actually generate from the actual main rules, but it's nice that the Quickstart rules give you a scenario, the basic rules to play, and the pre-generated characters. Now, if you've never played the game, the Quickstart rules are a pretty good place to go to. It presents most of the rules you need to play the game in a nice, simple to read package, and you're not going to be overwhelmed. So hopefully this look at the Quickstart rules has helped you get to grips with the game. So if I just quickly jumped back here, I probably jumped too far back, start off on page 6 and work your way through. So it talks here about rolling the dice and stuff, and the various bits and pieces, and I particularly like this page 8, where it gives you a nice simple version of what the attributes and the disciplines are, the focuses, and then a little bit further down it talks about traits, and that's really useful. It probably is in the main rule book, but it's a little bit harder to see because it's buried in like the middle of the rule book at kind of page 80, 90, whatever it was, which is the criticism I have about the main rule book. It's a brilliant rule book, but some of the info is a little bit hard to find because it's this big rule book with lots of fluff and pretty pictures and all that. This stripped back Quickstart set gives you much better access to the meat of the game. So there you go. Let's leave you on this little summary here. So you roll your dice pool, which is 2 dice as standard. You can buy up to an additional 3 dice for a total of 5. You're looking to roll under your discipline and attribute value. If you've got a focus, ideally you want to roll under your discipline value, so you get that extra success. Of course, if you roll a natural 1, that's an extra success anyway. You're typically going to want to get at least 1 success. The more successes you get, the easier it is to pass tests, and it will also potentially generate you momentum. There you go. You now know how to play. Basically, if all you do is just learn this sort of little bit here, then you'll be laughing. Anyway, there you go, a little quick supplement to my first video. Hopefully that tidies up maybe some of the bits I talked about. I was just thinking, gave you a nice look at the rules system from a kind of how it looks and my opinion of it, without maybe going into detail how it actually really works. So definitely check out the Quickstart rules, because obviously that's going to be a much better way of getting up to speed on the rule system than me just talking about it and flicking around quickly. So anyway, there you go. Hope that helps, and it's definitely helped me get my head around the rules. I'm going to dive back into the rule book because I'm hoping to get a game in January of the full version of Star Trek Adventures. As I say, my playing group, really looking forward to it, and I've been buffing up on a bit of Voyager and Deep Space Nine just to get myself back into the mood for Star Trek, and yeah, really excited to get this one to the table.